I'm going to start with a story that represents the best of what we do. About 2 years ago, a woman named Grace connected to Homeward Alliance's Family Services program. It was a time of crisis for Grace. She was escaping an unsafe housing situation with her 4 school-aged children. She had a job and enough money to pay for ongoing rent, but she could not afford a security deposit. She was stuck. Grace had come to the right place. She felt at ease when Homeward Alliance's bilingual family housing navigator spoke Spanish, Grace's native language. And she was elated when she learned that Homeward Alliance could pay application fees in support of her housing search and fund her security deposit when she found a place. The extra support quickly yielded dividends. Grace found housing within weeks, and she and her children moved into their new home. But her hardships were not yet over. A year later, she temporarily lost hours at her job, leading to a reduction in income that made it impossible for her to pay rent and feed her family. Homeward Alliance provided funds for a second time, along with utility assistance. Multiple rapid interventions made possible by a flexible private grant. Now more than a year removed from any assistance, Grace has graduated from Colorado State, found a better paying job that aligns with her degree and her long-term goals. If Grace needs us, we are here, but I suspect we won't hear from Grace anytime soon. Grace is a remarkable success story, and there are hundreds more just like hers, just at Homeward Alliance. The stories of people who escape homelessness are diverse and inspiring. I have seen people find housing and stay housed in the face of unthinkable odds. They might get support along the way, but that support is almost never what stands out. What stands out time and again is how strong they are, the resiliency of human beings. Tonight, we celebrate this resiliency, these triumphs over adversity. But when we celebrate stories like Grace, all too often, we focus on one side of the story, specifically the good side of the story. In this case, Grace's strength, the strength of her children, that we live in a community that cares, that we have agencies like Homeward Alliance and many others that are here to help. However, there is another way to view that same story, and it is a viewpoint that poses an obvious question. Why is it so hard for people like Grace in the first place? Why did it take a near miraculously timed infusion of resources, only available because one local agency has a flexible grant from a private funder, to prevent a woman and 4 children from either staying in an unsafe household or slipping into homelessness? It should not be this way. The lesson is not that a person who escapes homelessness is more resilient than a person who does not. The lesson is that people are resilient, period, and that it is a lack of opportunity, not individual failure, that causes people to stay homeless. I'm reminded in that context of another woman I met about 13 years ago when I first started with Homeward Alliance, then Homeless Gear. Her name was Mary. At the time, Homeward Alliance ran a street outreach program. Volunteer pairs went out 3 nights per week to distribute supplies to people who were sleeping outside and to share information about resources in the community. I trained new volunteers and I filled in about once a week. I met a lot of people, and their stories transformed me, but none more so than Mary. Mary was an older woman. She was kind. She was funny. She slept in her car with her 2 pet ferrets. She reminded me of my grandmother. I knew she had a physical disability, and I knew she was connected to resources and a case manager at the Murphy Center, but she didn't share details about that disability, and I did not pry. She talked about almost everything else: her childhood, her family, her ambitions, and I looked forward to our conversations. They were highlights of what were often dreary, sometimes dispiriting nights. And then one night, Mary wasn't there. She had passed away in her car. I learned more. Mary actually wasn't an old woman. She was 35 years old. She looked older because she had been suffering from terminal cancer, alone in her car. She had long ago declared bankruptcy due to medical bills. She had no living relatives. She was engaged in services at the Murphy Center and receiving treatment for her cancer. She was on every waiting list for every program that could support her. She was fighting to find a home, and she fought until she died. Mary's story is haunting. And some of it's personal. She was the first person who was homeless, who I knew, who passed away while homeless. I related to her. It felt just so wrong. It's a feeling I've felt many times since, and that I know many others in this room have felt. But Mary's life and death also sticks with me because it reminds me of two truths, two realities that I have been reminded of countless times in the years since. First, homelessness is systemic. It is inevitable, a byproduct of systems that make it more likely for people to become homeless and harder for people to escape homelessness. How can we expect everyone to avoid homelessness when the resources that help people stay housed, things like rent assistance and case management, are scarce and getting scarcer? How can we expect everyone to afford housing when we don't have enough housing that is affordable for everyone? What could Mary have done differently? What did Mary do wrong? Mary did not fail. She was failed. And second, even though what I just said is true, that homelessness is inevitable and massive, and we lack the resources right now to solve it for everyone, we have to keep trying. What happened to Mary is not okay, and it is our obligation as a community in this together to make it stop. That brings me to today, this moment in time. We are at a crossroads, an inflection point when it comes to how we respond to the issue of homelessness, locally, across the state, and nationwide. Some, with voices far louder than mine, would have you believe that everything we do, everything that we have learned over the last 17 years at Homeward Alliance is wrong, that it is based on false premises. They would have you believe that housing first is wrong, that somehow, despite decades of research demonstrating with remarkable clarity that stable housing is a prerequisite, a necessity for things like maintaining employment or seeking treatment for disabilities, that the opposite is actually true. That somehow, despite that same research demonstrating again with remarkable clarity that stable housing prevents people from accessing costly systems like hospital and jails, that the opposite is actually true. They would have you believe that helping people, providing things like food, shelter, rent assistance, is actually the problem. That we have created a culture of complacency in which people travel from city to city, bleeding dry whichever communities are most generous. Why would someone be motivated to find a job and a home, they will ask, when we make it so comfortable to be homeless? This despite the fact that, of course, homelessness is never comfortable. There is no such thing as a community where it is easy to be homeless. This despite the fact that people who are homeless are astronomically more likely, relative to people who are housed, to suffer physical or sexual violence, to struggle to meet basic needs, to survive. They would tell you that the populations that we think of as historically marginalized, people of color, people who identify as LGBTQ+, have just as much opportunity as anyone else. This despite the fact that in Larimer County, in a trend reflected virtually everywhere across the country, people who identify as Hispanic Latino represent 13% of our total population, but 23% of our homeless population. This despite the fact that nationwide, LGBTQ+ youth are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTQ youth. We have a decision to make. All of us do. We can move forward, or we can go backward. We can have more stories like Grace's or more stories like Mary's. We can choose to heed the lessons of Homeward Alliance's first 17 years, or we can pretend that we were wrong. For me, it's an easy choice. I'm not pretending. I believe in what we have done, and I believe in where we are headed. I believe that our organization is stronger and helps more people escape homelessness because our staff reflects the diversity of the people we serve. I believe that homelessness is first and foremost a housing problem, and I believe that we know, broadly speaking, how to solve it. We just do not have enough of what works, nor the political or societal will to make it happen. I believe that services are the solution, not the problem, and that any suggestion to the contrary is a distraction from where we should be focused. I believe in the admittedly simple formula that has worked for Homeward Alliance since we were founded in 2008. Find the need, figure out how to best meet that need, and get to work. And I believe, in fact, I promise, that even as Homeward Alliance continues to grow and adapt our programs, our core beliefs and the values that they represent will not change. We are here to do what is necessary and right, and we will fight for as long as it takes. I say this with confidence for two reasons. First, I work with a team of staff and volunteers at Homeward Alliance and at partner agencies that reminds me every day cynicism and resignation is a waste of time. The work is too important and we have to keep going. And second, we exist in a community and a state that shares our fundamental convictions. In a climate of profound uncertainty, when no one can say confidently that any federal funding will flow into our local homelessness response system in the coming years, a total that represents 20% of Homeward Alliance's budget, is the backbone of so many local programs, this truth that our community cares is what can save us. Let me underscore this point. Our community needs you. We need you to stand up for what is right in the face of what is so clearly wrong. We need you to remember that when it comes to homelessness, the experts are clear. We need to do more, not less, if we want to solve the problem. We need you to be proud of the services that we provide to people who are homeless, to recognize that a community should be judged, at least in part, by how it treats its most vulnerable members. We need you to volunteer. We need you to donate. We need you to spread the word. And we need these things now more than ever. Now is not the time to retreat. It is the time to double down. This is our moment. Let's not waste it. Thank you.